The high plain of Ollie's Reach has only one feature worth marking on a map, and the company calls it Anomaly 7. I called it the Listener, same as every surveyor before me, because that's what the old hands named it 60 years back and nobody ever found a better word. It stands at the center of a basin scoured flat by wind that never stops, arms lifted to a sky the color of wet slate, palms open like it's been waiting its whole existence for something to fall into them. It is 12 meters of black, glassy stone, fused smooth in places like it had once run molten and then forgotten how to cool all the way. 3 surveys before mine had scanned it top to bottom. Every one of them came back with the same flat reading: dense, inert, structurally sound, no power signature, no risk to operations. File it under geology and move on. The crews who worked the basin had their own private tradition of leaving small offerings at its feet before a long rotation. A coin, a bolt, a scrap of ration foil, half superstition, half boredom, the kind of habit people build around anything large and silent enough to feel like it's owed respect. Nobody believed it would ever do anything. That was the comfort of it, a thing that old, just standing there, asking nothing. I'd grown up hearing it talked about anyway, because my grandmother's grandmother had worked relay stations out past the rim before any of this was company land, and the family kept a story about her the way some families keep a photograph, worn soft at the edges, repeated more out of habit than belief. Esther heard something on the old long band one night that wasn't supposed to be there, and instead of logging it and going back to bed like procedure said, she answered it, sent something back. Got written up for it, or would have, except the relay station closed before anyone filed the paperwork, and Esther never spoke of it again to anyone who wrote anything down. What survived wasn't a transcript. It was a tune. She used to hum it cranking the handle on an old field tuner, 3 turns, always 3, like a private joke with herself, and she taught it to her daughter the same way you teach a child to knock on wood. By the time it reached me, it wasn't a story about first contact. It was just a thing you did before field work for luck. Crank the cricket 3 times, hum the line, get to work. I had the cricket in my kit that morning the way I always did, a brass hand tuner the size of a deck of cards, scratched almost smooth, useless for any actual survey work, kept because my mother kept it and her mother kept it before that. I remembered my grandmother's hands wrapped around mine the first time she showed me, out on the back step of a house 3 systems and 40 years away from that basin, telling me it didn't matter that I didn't know the tune properly, only that I kept turning the handle until it felt finished. She never once told me it meant anything. She just told me Esther had carried it, and that was reason enough. I was running a standard mineral sweep 40 meters from the listener's base, more out of company box checking than curiosity, and I cranked the cricket out of habit while I waited for the scanner to finish its pass. 3 turns. The old hum under my breath, half a tune I'd never once written down. The wind dropped first. I noticed that before anything else, the plane went quiet in a way it never had in 11 years of field work there, like something enormous had just leaned in to listen. Then the glyph lines on the listener's raised palms woke up. They didn't flare. They crept, a thread of deep violet-white light finding the first carved channel and following it, branching at the wrist, climbing the forearm in slow, deliberate pulses, exactly the rhythm of the cricket's hum, exactly the rhythm I hadn't realized I was still cranking. My hands had gone still on the tuner. The light kept climbing on its own. I should have called it in immediately. I did call it in, eventually, voice cracking worse than I'd like to admit on the open channel, and Devraj came running across the flat from the rover with his rifle half raised before he saw my face and lowered it. Because I wasn't running and I wasn't screaming. I was just standing there with my hand still curled around a useless brass toy while 60 years of dead readings caught fire one glyph at a time. The light reached the shoulders and the listener moved. Not violently, not even quickly. After what had to be centuries holding the same raised, reaching posture, its arms came down the way a man's arms come down after he's held something heavy overhead far longer than he meant to, slow, trembling at the joints, stone grinding against stone, in a low groan that I felt in my back teeth before I heard it in my ears. The palms that had been lifted to an empty sky for longer than my whole family's recorded history turned, very deliberately, toward me, and stopped a meter above the ground, open, waiting, the same shape they'd held through 60 years of useless scans, except now they were lit from within like coals under glass. Devraj had stopped 10 meters back. He told me later he could see his own breath catch in the cold and just stay there, fogging nothing, like even his body wasn't sure it wanted to keep running on schedule. The eyes were the last thing to light, and they weren't even the part that mattered, a faint warming at the brow ridge, easy to miss if you were watching the hands, which I was. What mattered was the sound that came after, and I want to be honest about it because I've told this story exactly once before and people always want it to sound like a voice. It wasn't, not at first. It was a chord 3, maybe 4 tones layered on top of each other, rock deep, the kind of sound you feel behind your sternum before your ears catch up. And underneath that chord, woven into it so closely I almost missed it, was the cricket's hum. My great-great-grandmother's 3-turn lullaby, played back to me out of 12 meters of black stone that had been listening for it since before either of our nations had a name for the country we'd eventually call home. Then the chord resolved, the way a held note resolves into a word, and the word was mine. Queen of the answered call. It said it once. It didn't repeat itself, and somehow I understood, standing there with wind starting to move again against my face, with Devraj's boots finally crunching closer across the ash, that it never would. Some doors only open once, and what matters is who's standing in front of them when they do. I want to tell you I felt like royalty. I didn't. I felt like someone had just handed me a ledger I hadn't known I was already in, my name written in an entry generations old, in a hand I'd never seen, for a debt I hadn't known we owed. Esther hadn't been written up for breaking protocol that night on the long band. She'd been the first voice in a conversation that took 140 years to get a second sentence, and nobody, not the company, not the relay station, not even her own daughter, had ever known the call was still open, waiting on an answer to the answer. They studied the listener for 3 years after that. They never found a single new mechanism inside it, nothing that explained how it had read 60 years of company scanners as nothing at all and one tuning fork's worth of an old woman's stubbornness as everything. The official report calls it an anomaly, same as it always did, and I let them, because some things don't survive being filed. I still carry the cricket. I still crank it 3 times before field work, and I still hum the line under my breath, except now I know what it is and who it was for. I think about Esther more than I used to, not as a name in a family story anymore, but as a woman standing alone at a console in the middle of a long, dull night shift, hearing something she had no authority to answer and choosing to answer it anyway, with no expectation that it would ever come back to her, let alone to someone 4 generations down a line she'd never lived to see. She didn't do it for glory. There wasn't any to be had. She did it because something asked, and she happened to be the one standing closest when it did. That's the part I keep coming back to. The listener didn't choose me for anything I earned. It chose me because I was standing where Esther's answer eventually had to land, carrying the only thing left that still remembered how to ask the question properly. Some nights, out on whatever flat gray plane the company sends me to next, I find myself listening for the wind to drop, just to see if anything out there is still keeping the line open. Esther answered once, not knowing if anyone was listening back. I got the proof that someone was. That's not a small thing to be handed on an ordinary Tuesday, doing a mineral sweep nobody thought would matter. I don't expect it to happen twice. I don't think it's supposed to. Some calls only get answered once in a family's whole existence, and you spend the rest of it being the proof that it mattered.